The first thing you will notice, Bronco Nation, is that the Boise State flag is upside down. This is not a sign of disrespect, but rather of distress. In the naval customs, when a ship is in need of assistance, it will turn its flag upside down to symbolize to passerbyers that it is in trouble and it needs help. That could not be better said for the current state of affairs at Boise State right now. My last video was only 2 days ago. I made it Saturday evening, and already within 48 hours, we've lost our offensive coordinator, fired, ascension of Dirk Koetter, former Boise State head coach, to the offensive coordinator position, and as of today, Hank Bachmeier announced that he is transferring from Boise State. I don't think anybody could have said that they could have seen this coming. I know when I did my season preview, number one on my list was not Boise State's going to be 2-2 out the gate, lose its offensive coordinator, and lose its four-year starting quarterback to the transfer portal. That was nowhere on our minds when we started looking at this season. This is an incredible state of affairs here at Boise State. I apologize for this video coming out a little bit later. I'm actually glad that it did, because now I'm able to talk about Hank Bachmeier as well. But I'm currently, as longtime viewers will know, I live in Florida, and I have been dealing with hurricane preparations for Hurricane Ian that is coming in. Well, a storm is brewing at Boise State right now, and we're going to talk about that in this video. We're going to talk about Tim Plough. We're going to talk about Hank Bachmeier. We're going to ask, can Boise State season be saved? Maybe I should have used the term salvaged. Can the wreckage of this storm that is pushed through Boise State, can the season be salvaged? Is there somewhere to go up from here? Obviously, Boise State at a low, one of the lowest of lows that they've ever seen in their program history. Is there a way up and forward from here? We're going to talk about that all today. So obviously the big news right off the bat, Tim Plough gone. Let's talk about some facts, because a lot of this is going to be analysis, some of it's going to be assertions, a lot of it's going to be my perspective, but let's look at some facts off the front end here that we're going to build the basis of our discussion from today. Fact number one, Boise State has only 652 yards passing in 4 games. 652 yards passing. This isn't a school that only runs the ball. This isn't Army. This is Boise State. Boise State throws the ball. 652 yards passing overall, only a 57.4% completion percentage. That's good for 118th in the nation out of 131 teams. And actually, the starting quarterback, or former starting quarterback Hank Bachmeier, his percentage was lower. His completion percentage overall was 54.3%. That 57.4% takes into account Taylen Green's numbers from the Oregon State game as well. Boise State, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That's it in 4 games. They were averaging 149.3 yards per game through the air. Also good for 118th overall. I apologize, I made a quick error. 57.4% completion percentage is 112th overall, but Boise State's passing game, yards per game, 118th out of 131 teams. Their running game, not doing much better. 481 yards in 4 games, 3.6 yard average per carry, 3 touchdowns. 119.3 yards per game, which is 96th in the nation. So a little bit better than the passing game. But Boise State is not a team that is in the bottom third, or is used to seeing themselves in the bottom third of the FBS. Boise State is a team that strives for top 25 and definitely top 50%, and they are nowhere near that. And add to all of that, Boise State lost to UTEP. I mean, these numbers, if they were coming with wins, fans would probably be disgruntled, but it wouldn't matter. If Boise State was 3-1 right now, if Boise State was 4-0 right now, Boise State fans would be okay with this numbers. But Boise State lost to UTEP. Let me say that again. Boise State lost to UTEP. This is not a team that loses to UTEP. When I saw that loss, the first thing that went through my mind was, wow, if this was a Power 5 program, someone would get fired. And you know what? The next day, someone got fired. Because Boise State is a Power 5 program in the group of 5. Boise State is a program that aspires to be nationwide, to be better than what they are currently. And they're a program that aspires to be a national brand, to be a team that goes out and competes, not just for bowl games, not just for New Year's Six, but competes for the playoffs and for national championships. Boise State is a Power 5 level team in the group of 5. And while I'm not happy that Boise State is currently where it's at, the fact that they would take such a drastic move to correct an issue that they saw in their program shows where Boise State currently is in the overall scheme of the FBS. Let's talk about Tim Plough. Tim Plough overseeing, again, one more stat to throw out here before we transition. Tim Plough overseeing an offense that overall was only accomplishing 268.7 yards per game. That's 116th nationwide. So Tim Plough out. Was it his fault? Okay, there's a lot that you can say about whether or not this was his fault. I mean, a lot of these were Harson's players. A lot of these were Harson's guys that Tim Plough was coming and working with. This was the first season that he actually brought in some players, but most of those guys aren't playing because they're true freshmen. So this was mostly Harson's players that he was working with. Also, the last week, just before the UTEP game, so the week before the UTEP game, a bunch of articles came out talking about some comments that had been made by Plough, by Avalos, and even by former head coach Hawkins, Dan Hawkins for Boise State, talking about whether or not Tim Plough was really the one calling the shots here. Because Tim Plough, air raid style guy, right? Air raid style guy for Boise State, for UC Davis, before he came over to Boise State. The offense that we saw out of Tim Plough didn't look anything like UC Davis. I mean, there can be some arguments whether or not that offense would have worked here, but it didn't look anything like what UC Davis was running. There was a lot of those articles were basically saying that Tim Plough was doing what Andy Avalos wanted. That the offense that Boise State was running was Andy Avalos' offense. Tim Plough was the one putting the pieces together, but that the offense that Boise State was running, which was a little bit of a run-heavy offense, which we've really never seen at Boise State, run-heavy offense was what Andy Avalos wanted. Now, the question has to be made, has Tim Plough just became a scapegoat here? I think that as an offensive coordinator for Boise State, if this truly was the offense that he wanted to run, he should have been fired. And I said that at my last video. I said, if this really is Tim Plough's offense and he is 100% in control, then he deserves to be fired. However, if he was just doing what he was being told to, if he wasn't being allowed to show his full self, then there's some questions here about whether or not he actually deserved this. Obviously, questions were asked. An answer had to be given, and Tim Plough, the easy focal point who had soaked up the hate of Bronco Nation, was an easy guy to let go. But if things don't change going forward with Dirk Koetter, there's some, obviously the dialogue that's going to happen is, well, Dirk Koetter's taking over from Tim Plough. He screwed up the offense so bad it doesn't matter. It's not Dirk Koetter's fault either. And maybe that is true. Maybe that's partially the case. But if those articles were right, then this is not necessarily going to fix everything for Boise State, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. Bachmeier gone, okay? Hank Bachmeier. I'm wearing this jersey because obviously it's relevant to the news, but it's also the last time I'm really going to be able to get to wear this jersey. Hank Bachmeier out at Boise State, 4-year player at Boise State and gone. This is nuts. I don't think anybody would have seen Hank Bachmeier performing the way he has. He has played terribly so far to start, but the fact that he would leave halfway through the year for a program that he has been at since his freshman year and been a starter at since his freshman year is crazy. There's just a whirlwind here. The cyclone that's ripping through Boise State is throwing guys out left and right. The question is to be asked, who's next? If Boise State doesn't get a handle on some things, they're going to start losing some. Boise State really did a good job of surviving the transfer portal this offseason. A lot of Mountain West teams were wrecked by the transfer portal, but if Boise State's not careful here, if they don't do something, which we're going to talk about here later in the video, what Boise State needs to do going forward, if they don't do some things to fix this situation, make it a little bit better, they're not going to just start losing some recruits, and obviously there's some sharks going after Boise State's current quarterback. In the next recruiting class, they're going to start losing some of these top players here. You could start talking maybe Ashton Genty. You could start talking Joe Caples. You could start talking a lot of players. Maybe some of these guys that are seniors that still have playing time left. George Halani maybe. There's a lot of players on this roster who were close to Hank Bachmeier, who were okay, uncomfortable with the system that was in place, and now that system has radically changed. Boise State has to do something to assure the fan base, assure the current players, and assure the players coming in that Boise State is moving in the right direction. And hopefully this was the right move here with Tim Plough. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about, can the season be saved? Okay, so is the issue with the season gone? Boise State's offensive line has been bad since 2019. If you were to point blame at one unit on this offense, it's the offensive line, and bringing in a new offensive coordinator is not going to fix that. They've had a bad offense overall since 2020, and that was before this head coaching staff even came in. The wide receivers are not getting open. Last week, there were still some issues with the play calling, as there have been all season, but there were some more complex route trees. There were 4 or 5, options in the pattern, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, 4 or 5 passing options in the pattern, and nobody was open against UTEP. This is not a shutdown dominant SEC defense or even upper level Mountain West defense. This is UTEP, and Boise State's receivers were not open. The O-line obviously still can't block. We can't stop this running game. We have 2 incredible running backs in George Halani and Ashton Genty, an established established, proven running back in George Holani and an incredible freshman talent in Ashton Jeanty, and neither of them can get going in the running game. There's been some sparks. George Holani had a decent game against UTEP, and he had a nice coming out game against UT Martin this season, but he still hasn't been able to establish himself or reach the peak that both these running backs are capable of. Great running backs not able to establish a running game. And now you don't even have your stability at the quarterback position. Stable questions can be made about how stable that position was to begin with inconsistencies from Hank Bachmeier. But at least you had a senior at the helm who's proven he can do some things in the past. And that 2019 season was great. Obviously, I mean, we all remember that 2019 season, and we remember the way it started against Florida State and the way it worked up before his injury and against Hawaii. And then the 2020 season, yeah, there was a lot of issues with that 2020 season, but he still played better than he did this year. And last year with his best season overall. So Hank Bachmeier is showing he can be a better quarterback than what he has produced this season. And I kind of feel like he's been wasted. I kind of feel like that 2019 season showed a lot of raw talent that was never properly developed. I mean, he had a different offensive coordinator every single year, pretty much, that he was at Boise State. This was going to be his first year with the same offensive coordinator, and he went through 2 head coaching changes. So I just feel like, or 2 head coaches overall. I just feel like he was never properly developed. That we've wasted a great talent who could have been so much better than he was for Boise State. So now Dirk Koetter coming in, got a great resume, which we'll go over here in a second, but he's coming in and he's inheriting, just like Tim Plough inherited, an offense that is broken, and now arguably even more broken than it was for Tim Plough. What can Boise State do with a really tough schedule left in this season for Boise State? We'll talk about that here in a second. So Dirk Koetter, okay, if there's one guy who can save your program, on this roster, it's Dirk Koetter. 4-time FBS offensive coordinator, 3 of those at Power 5 schools. Boise State head coach, obviously, 1998 to 2000. Arizona State head coach after that. 4-time offensive coordinator at the NFL level, most recently with the Falcons, 2019 to 2020. And his Tampa Bay head coach. Been a head coach in the NFL level, 2016 to 2018. At his time at Boise State, those 3 years, Boise State averaged 274 yards per game. Remember, passing. Remember, this year they were only averaging 149.3 yards per game. And rushing 170.2 yards per game. 2 out of the 3 years that he was at Boise State had 1,000-yard rushers, and he had 2 10-win seasons at the helm for Boise State when they were in the Big West before moving up, obviously, out of Boise State to Arizona State as the head coach there. He saw some great players. He recruited and developed some great players while he was at Boise State. Bart Hendricks, Billy Wingfield, Brock Forsey, Jay Swilly, these guys come to mind. There was also some guys that he brought in that didn't necessarily rise to prominence during his time at Boise State, but then became greats later on. Ryan Dinwiddie, Tim Gilligan, David Michael. And also, interesting side note here, not a starter under him, but a backup for 4 years was Brian Harsin at Boise State. And he also took on a lot of coaching characteristics from his time there with Dirk Koetter that he then used in his career. So, can Koetter revive this offense? Well, the first question is, will Avalos give him the reins? I mean, again, no one ever came out and specifically outright said, Avalos is driving this offense, Koetter doesn't have control. But there was a lot of, hinting at it. There was a lot of kind of side talk and, just kind of saying that this isn't necessarily Tim Plough, entirely on Tim Plough. So whether that means, okay, whether that means the media or the team was trying to shift some blame away, or whether that means that the truth is that Tim Plough wasn't necessarily fully in control, the question still has to be asked. You've got Dirk Koetter, who came in as an offensive analyst for Boise State. He's basically just watching his son play and hanging around practices, and they were like, hey, you're here all the time, come in and help us, give some advice on the offense for what you're doing for free. Let's give you, a small contract, and you can do it, not as a career, but kind of a part-time thing for Boise State. So they brought him in as an offensive analyst, and now he's the offensive coordinator halfway through the season. I mean, that takes a lot of faith as a head coach, regardless of what tendencies you might have had before. That takes a lot of head coach to just say, okay, here's the reins of my offense, take it, it's yours. I mean, that's be a lot for any head coach, and especially for a first-time head coach like Andy Avalos. I mean, first-time head coach Andy Avalos now has a offensive coordinator with one of the most impressive resumes of any offensive coordinator currently in the FBS. I mean, how many other offensive coordinators out there? I'm sure someone will comment with some examples, but I can't think of any right now. How many other offensive coordinators out there have been NFL head coaches, multiple job positions at NFL level offenses, and had the longevity of career that Dirk Koetter has had? I mean, as a second year head coach here for Andy Avalos, coming into his second year at Boise State, second year as a head coach overall, I mean, it's got to be pretty hard to have someone like that working for you. Just as a human nature, as a human tendency, I mean, we could potentially see him maybe taking control maybe more than he would want to otherwise, just because you're trying to assert that you're the one in charge. I mean, that's a human tendency. So this is going to be really tough to see how this works out. Can Avalos work with Koetter? Can he give over the reins of the offense to Koetter? Because Andy Avalos is a defensive guy. You know, I've said this in my last video when I was saying Andy Avalos, if he is taking over part of the reins of offense, he needs to let go with Tim Plough. Because when you see a head coach, you very rarely see defensive coaches at the head coaching level. Usually you'll see offensive head coaches at the, former offensive backgrounds at the head coaching level, and they'll be pretty involved with the offense. Even if they have a good offense coordinator, they'll still be pretty involved, but they'll let the defense do their thing. They'll hire a good guy who's going to take care of the defense, and they'll make some tweaks here and there, and especially at the coaching level. If the guy's not doing his job, they'll fire him and bring someone else in who can do the job, but they pretty much let the defense go. This way around, obviously Andy Avalos, as a defensive guy, has had a big impact on the defense for Boise State. But he also seems to be meddling with the offense based on the news that has come out about this situation. It would make sense. I mean, it would really make sense that Tim Plough is having someone else say, or has been having someone else say, I want to run things a little bit differently, because it really doesn't make sense that an air raid style guy would come in and first off run the offense at all that he's been doing at Boise State, which was more of a balanced attack last season, but then would want to run a run-heavy attack this year. That doesn't make any sense. It's completely contrary to what he knows and to his natural tendencies as an offensive coordinator. That does make a little more sense from a defensive perspective, where you're trying to rest your defense and give them opportunities to come back on the field strong and fresh, and you're trying to prioritize the defense. It definitely makes sense that definitely points to the fact that Andy Avalos may have been meddling a little bit in the offense here. So if that's the case, if Boise State's going to succeed this season offensively, Koetter has to be allowed to have full control of this offense, because it just doesn't work when you got too many cooks in the kitchen and you have one cook who doesn't necessarily have the same background trying to cook with a recipe that he doesn't know how to work. So Boise State, can Koetter succeed? Well, the question is, will Koetter be the one being allowed to fail to succeed, or will Avalos be interfering with the Avalos as well, with the offense as well? But even if Koetter is given the full reins here, can Boise State work with the players that they have to craft a new offense? I mean, you're halfway through the year. You're not quite halfway through the year, but you're 4 games into the year, and you're coming up against the toughest part of your schedule. San Diego State, Fresno State, Air Force, Colorado State, BYU, and then kind of maybe a not quite as difficult ending with Nevada, Wyoming, Utah State. Boise State might not have time to craft a new offense here. I mean, coming in, at the beginning of the week, you could throw some new things out there, but you just don't have time with this level of opponents to change much. I mean, Boise State fans, I don't think we're going to see much of a different offense here. Obviously, it's going to be different with the fact that Hank Bachmeier is not going to be there anymore, and obviously, that's Koetter already indicating a tendency towards a certain form of offense. Obviously, Hank Bachmeier doesn't suit the run-heavy attack quite as well as Taylen Green does, who can also use his legs and be okay in the passing game. Hank Bachmeier much better with an air raid style attack or a balanced attack where he's able to work effectively through the passing game. So this might be evidence of the complete opposite of what fans are potentially hoping for here, that Andy Avalos is going to be more involved in the offense than he was before. Obviously, Tim Plough, air raid style guy, he doesn't mesh with the kind of offense that Andy Avalos has indicated that he wants to run. Dirk Koetter, guy with a lot of experience, not saying that he was ever a run-heavy guy, but a guy with a lot of experience, he might be able to better craft an offense to run, and he can do it better than a guy who's air raid focused like Tim Plough. And I think that we're going to see that, maybe the running game having a little bit more effect. But Boise State looking like they're going to continue with the offense they've been trying to run this season, just maybe trying to be a little bit more effective at it. Now the question is, can this offense be effective in a run-heavy attack? I don't think it can. Boise State's obviously got 2 great running backs, but they have an atrocious offensive line. This is not an offensive line to run a run-heavy attack. This is an offensive line that will work great with a pass-heavy, air raid style attack, where you can get quick passes out, that you can keep the defense on their heels so they're not just mad charging the line every single time. Get lots of passes out in the flat, running backs, whatever. I won't go into too much depth here because that's not going to happen anymore. Boise State is not built for a run-heavy attack. So if the offense isn't going to change much, because honestly, it can't really, and I don't think that Andiopoulos wants it to, can Boise State be effective with Dirk Koetter at the helm and Andiopoulos running the offense that he wants to run here with the players that they have? I mean, maybe a couple years from now, Boise State's recruited some players to fit this offensive scheme they can. But even with Taylen Green's legs being an added benefit in the running game, I just don't think that you're going to be able to go out here and effectively run up against defensive fronts, especially the ones Boise State's going to be seeing in San Diego State, Fresno State, and Air Force, and then BYU. I don't think that Boise State can run that offense effectively. So I think we're still in for a bit of a hard time here this season for Boise State. And can TJ Green succeed and fulfill fan expectations in the first place is another question. I mean, Boise State fans have been clamoring for TJ Green. A lot of that, I think, has to do with disappointment in Hank Bachmeier. But another part of it is the excitement level that TJ Green brings. I mean, he is an incredibly athletic guy, but he doesn't have the most effective arm as of yet. He's a lot of raw talent, kind of like Hank Bachmeier was coming in, but he's a lot of raw talent that has to be developed. And I don't think this season we're going to see TJ Green at his true potential this year. Boise, he's got a tough defensive task that he's got to come up against to develop himself in the next few games. Boise State fans, I think we're in for another rough ride here with TJ Green at the helm. I mean, Boise State fans have been clamoring for TJ Green. I've kept saying he's not the guy to go out and find success this season. And I said if TJ Green is a starter, I don't know if we would make a bowl game. And I'm going to stand by that here. I mean, I will hope that he proves me wrong. I hope that this whole offense proves me wrong. I hope that it's a completely different offense, that the running game is now effective, that Dirk Koetter is able to use all of his talents and abilities to craft something out of this offense, and that TJ Green rises to the occasion, next man up, and becomes a starter here for Boise State that Boise State fans expect him to be. But Boise State's got to play, like I said, San Diego State, Fresno State, Air Force, and BYU. All of those, bearing a miracle, look like losses to me. Boise State just lost to UTEP. And it wasn't just on the offense, by the way. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion for another video. But Boise State's loss to UTEP was not just on the offense. The defense, which has been a strength of this team, really let them down a little bit, and especially in that secondary. Now, the games that Boise State can win, Colorado State, Nevada, Wyoming, Utah State, all those teams have looked to have a little bit of down years, but Wyoming almost beat BYU this Saturday. I mean, they really stepped up in that game. And Colorado State, I mean, they've been a little bit of an odd factor here because they are themselves adjusting to a brand new head coaching staff and brand new players coming in, so they might look different in the second half of this season. And Utah State is a team that has looked terrible so far, but this is a team that won the Mountain West Championship last year. They could look better at the end of the year. Boise State has a lot of games here left to play, and they've got to get 4 wins out of it, and only 4 of these games are really games that they can go in saying, we probably have a good chance of winning. They drop one of those, they don't make a bowl game. I'm going to talk about what Boise State has to do this year to right the ship. I'm not saying Boise State needs to go out and win the Mountain West Championship, because I think that's probably not something that they're going to be capable of this year with what Boise State has left. But Boise State has to make a bowl game this year. They absolutely have to make a bowl game this year if they want to avoid the fallout of the transfer portal. I mean, Boise State doesn't make a bowl game this year, there's going to be a lot more questions asked. The head coach might be getting some questions asked of his ability to hold on to the reins here for Boise State. Their players that are currently on the team, I think a lot of those guys would be in jeopardy. I mean, remember, Boise State's losing a bunch of guys anyway just to graduation. Boise State's losing a bunch of guys anyway just to graduation because of being sixth-year seniors. So Boise State's already going to be losing a lot of experience, and then some of these fresh faces, these younger guys who are supposed to be the future of Boise State. If Boise State can't make a bowl game, if they can't restore confidence and revamp this offense, it's going to be a big offseason, and not in a good way for Boise State. And that's just talking about the guys currently on the team. I mean, a lot of these incoming recruits might start looking different ways as well, and it's going to be really hard to recruit into this offense with the instability that's currently at Boise State. So Boise State has got to find a way to win those 4 games that I said are winnable, and maybe pull off an upset in one of these other games. I mean, if Boise State can just pull off, with Boise State fans, I think, would be happy if they were able to win 1 out of those 4 games. With what's happened so far, with a disappointing start to the season so far, with the obviously what's happened in the last 48 hours, if Boise State could just pull off 1 upset against San Diego State, Fresno State, Air Force, and BYU, all of those teams are rivals. If they can just win 1 of those games, that would be a huge accomplishment. And then I think if Boise State can win 1 of those games, they will make a bowl game. I think they will get to bowl eligibility if they can win one of those games, because either they'll win the other 4 games that are on that list, or they might lose one, but then that unexpected win will count for one of those. Boise State has got to figure out a way to get a win in one of these unexpected games, and they have to figure out a way to balance this offense and to move forward. Is Dirk Koetter the offensive coordinator going forward for Boise State? I don't know. I think he definitely could be. I don't know if he wants to be. I mean, I think this, to me, feels more like a stopgap move. You know, you've got Boise State's hemorrhaging. There's a lot of questions being asked. Andy Avalos is feeling the pressure. Someone's got to answer. Tim Plough, he gets the axe because he's the most obvious issue. Boise State has to bring somebody in. That guy is Dirk Koetter, and he is a great, if there was ever a great interim offensive coordinator, it's Dirk Koetter. But is he the future of this offense? Boise State fans will not be, and the staff overall will not be able to analyze Dirk Koetter's future based on this year, regardless of what happens. Well, I won't say regardless. If Boise State goes undefeated from here on out, I mean, that proves that Dirk Koetter is basically a god. But if Boise State, loses every game from here on out, that doesn't prove that he's a bad offensive coordinator. I mean, I think we know that he's not a bad offensive coordinator. But also just had the question to be asked: is he the guy for Boise State going forward? Is his chemistry? Is he the guy that can work with Andy Avalos? Is Andy Avalos, fresh into here at the FBS level, is he confident enough in his own abilities? Is he strong enough in his own abilities as a head coach and as a person to be able to work with effectively a guy of Dirk Koetter's abilities and of Dirk Koetter's resume? So the first question has to be asked, do they meld well together? Second question has to be asked, does Dirk Koetter even want this job? Does he want the full-time pressures of being an offensive coordinator for Boise State, which is a tough place to be an offensive coordinator at, because Boise State fans have high expectations for not just their offensive role, but when it comes down to individual units. I mean, Boise State might have a great running game, but if they have a terrible quarterback or passing game, Boise State fans are not going to be happy. You have to be able to succeed in every facet of the offense to be a well-loved coordinator here at Boise State. So there's a lot of pressure. Dirk Koetter's reaching the end of his coaching career. You could have said he had reached it. Retired, came back to Boise, was watching his son play and supporting his son, and now he's being thrust back into the furnace. So does he even want this job to begin with? That will be a question for the offseason. But whatever the issue is here, Boise State has got to find some consistency here. If this is Dirk Koetter's team, he needs to be given full reins to start crafting and melding this team to his image so that Boise State can find some of that consistency. And even if they don't make a bowl game, he can give incoming recruits and the players that are currently on the team some sense of hope and confidence in the future. If he's just a stopgap measure, Boise State, the offense overall, needs to meld to what Andy Avalos wants in a future offensive coordinator. So Boise State either needs to be melding this team towards Dirk Koetter's image so that Dirk Koetter can go and promote that to the players on the roster and to future players regardless of the record overall, or Boise State needs to start melding this team with an eye for the future, start giving guys that you want to stick around playing time to make sure that they feel like they have a part of this legacy, and start setting up the pieces for this offense so that a new guy can come in and succeed here. So Boise State's got two different visions here that they've got to decide what's the long-term future and start playing for that this season. As far as the Mountain West Championship game goes, I mean, we can be hopeful. Boise State's 1-0 in the Mountain West right now and undefeated on the blue, but Boise State's going to play San Diego State this weekend. That's going to tell a lot of things, where this offense stands, what the future projection is for this season, and what the hopes can be for the fan base. I think right now as a fan base, the best thing we can do is just to root for our team and to keep supporting them no matter what, to understand that this is a crazy, weird year for Boise State, and that any players and coaches that are still on this roster need our full support to even have a chance of having any form of success this season. And overall, just keep looking forward to hopefully next year things working out a little bit better. But Boise State fans, thanks for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe. This is a tough one to have a conversation about for sure. And, I'd like to hear your thoughts. There's a lot of discussion that can still be had on this issue. I didn't even talk about, what happens if TJ Green isn't the guy. I mean, do we see Sam Vidlak? Do we see Maddox Madsen, the true freshman on the team? That's a whole nother video, basically. But I'm going to cut it off here at 30 minutes because I think I've talked long enough on this issue. What are your thoughts? Do you like this move by Boise State? Do you think Boise State's going to get better? What are your thoughts on Hank Bachmeier? Let me know it all in the comments. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Big Blue!